Hey, welcome everybody. It's great to hopefully see you, or at least you're seeing us. We know that these are different times, and we thought it would be really important to just come together and just have just a conversation about grief. All of us are dealing with the struggle of COVID-19 and the implications of it on our lives. A lot of our day-to-day routines have changed, our inability to see one another. A lot of us are feeling isolated, and a lot of us might have been experiencing grief already for our losses, but now it looks very different in COVID-19. So we thought we might come together and just sort of talk about that. I heard something the other day, and someone said, that weird feeling that you're feeling might be your grief. And it just struck me that, you know, many of us are experiencing our grief in different ways because we're in different times. And sometimes we don't even understand our day-to-day grief, let alone trying to work through it in the midst of these changing circumstances. If we turn on the news, we can see things change each day. We can see our routines have changed or they've stopped. A lot of our structure and the things that brought us a sense of security and control have been broken down or changed, and we don't know what our quote unquote new normal is, and we're just trying to figure these things out. So the four of us just felt like, you know, we want to come together and be a resource. We want to offer whatever we can to all of you, and we hope that in something that we say that you'll come away with one little nugget that can help you in your grief. So we'll take a moment and we'll just ask each of our folks here to introduce themselves. We'll start with Dr. Alyssa.
Hi, I'm Dr. Alyssa Reingold. I'm a clinical psychologist and professor at the National Crime Victims Center at the Medical University of South Carolina in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. And I predominantly work in the area of trauma and grief. I've been working with folks who've lost loved ones to homicide for a number of years, as well as work with folks who've been impacted by mass violence. So I'm hopefully here to be able to, you know, be a resource of information and support.
Thank you, Alyssa. Easter.
Yes, hi. My name is Easter LaRoche. I am a victims advocate and the coordinator of victim services at Charleston County Sheriff's Office. I've been working in victim services for the past 21 years. I work with victims of violent crimes, but specifically victims of homicides. We have a homicide survivor support group, and we will talk about that a little later on within the webinar.
Wonderful. Patty.
Hi, good morning. I'm Patty Davis, and I am the coordinator of the survivor care team of the Coastal Crisis Chaplaincy. And I also am a survivor in that I lost my beautiful son, Garrett, about 9 years ago.
Thank you, Patty. And I'm Rich Robinson with the Coastal Crisis Chaplaincy, and it's one of the honors of my life to be able to work with each and everyone here and all the agencies that they represent. We, in Charleston, we have a very unique ability to just work beautifully together and seamlessly too. So whether it's a chaplain on the scene of a homicide with the family, and then the survivor care team doing follow-up, and the victims advocate all providing resources, and then guiding them into some kind of grief support, whether it be through NUSC, National Crime Victim Center, or the support groups or other clinicians. It's just really beautiful to see in Charleston this cohesive continuum of care for grief. So I think it's good. We've got a good sort of group of different perspectives and mindsets here. But I think maybe, you know, we're all coming from different perspectives here, but we know that grief comes from different perspectives. We know that grief is common to all of us. Every human being is going to experience grief, but how each human being experiences grief can sometimes be as different as each human being. But how do we grasp it? How do we understand? Where do we just start with basics of what grief looks like? Dr. Alyssa, do you mind just sort of talking about what grief looks like in general?
Sure. So I think, Rich, you hit upon an important point that grief is a very unique experience. So how I might experience the loss of a loved one might look very different from how you experience it. So I think that's very important. So when we experience grief, grief itself is not a feeling. It's actually a constellation of lots of different emotions and thoughts and physical sensations. We don't actually grieve in stages. So I know there's sort of this common lore that we have to go through, that people say you grieve, you know, you're just denial and there's bargaining and there's anger and acceptance. And we actually know that we don't actually grieve like that. We may experience anger, we may experience denial, we may experience bargaining, but we don't actually grieve in sort of a linear fashion. That we have a whole host, and we kind of pinball back and forth between different emotions. It might be sadness, it might be yearning, it might be anger, it might be relief, it might be joy, reminiscing. So we might experience a whole host of different emotions over the course of sort of our journey with grief, because I like to explain grief as more of a journey. You're taking it with you as you're kind of journeying through life. Usually, and I kind of talk quickly about timeline, because I think it's important, especially during COVID. So when we experience a loss of a loved one, usually that first month after the loss, we're surrounded by support. We are surrounded by rituals that helps us accept that loss, helps us start to figure out how we put the pieces in some way back together. And it's usually about 2 to 3 months period after that initial first month of all those rituals and that support, where we see people's grief tend to worsen. And before it starts to perhaps get better, we can wrap our hands, you know, our heads around it. And so I think that's important to recognize, especially for those that might have lost a loved one now during COVID, because they don't have that typical rituals and support that's surrounding them right now to be able to help kind of move through that trajectory. So I think that's an important piece to kind of, for us to tend to, of looking what that might look like. For those that have lost a loved one in prior years, this COVID might have impacted that grief reaction as well. It might bring up more emotions and that you might not have been experiencing for a while. But now that we're all sitting at home, we're distancing, we're not engaging in our regular day-to-day interactions, more thoughts, more feelings might come to the surface now. And people might wonder, you know, why now? But it's because there's so much uncertainty going on. It might bring up memories of other times when things were uncertain. And especially for those that have experienced traumatic loss, like homicide, suicide, mass violence, other types of accidents. Those losses during those times were sudden. There was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns. And so this time period during COVID might kind of resurface even more so for some of those particular types of loss survivors.
It just seems that with the social distancing and people being unable to connect with one another, I know for us as chaplains, trying to do things virtually has been kept us busy, but it's a real challenge, because you really, I think you realize how much you value human connectedness, or maybe not value, but need. It's connecting virtually is a little different, and a lot of those things that we had done before we can't do at all, or we just haven't figured out how to do them. You know, sometimes it's like when you have something in life happen like this, it's almost like the hand raking through the bottom of the fishbowl. I think of when I was a kid and having to clean out the fish tank, and it moves all this stuff up, and you don't really know where anything is, and you sort of have to wait until everything settles down. For those who this time, their grief looks very different, and they're sort of waiting for the things to settle. Can you give someone a little clarity, Dr. Alyssa, on how might grief look different? How might they be seeing it manifest in ways that they might not have thought of before?
Well, certain emotions, I think for some might be more intense now. There might be, what I like to call sudden upsurges in grief uh, in grief emotions. So, some folks might be more ruminative or thinking about the loss a little bit more recently than they might have in the past, or there might be other reminders, or thinking about what life would be like if their loved one was here during this time period. So there may be more contemplating, more thinking, more even just more intense physical sensations that come along with grief as well for some individuals. Especially right now, since we're all kind of isolating, or a lot of people are isolating, this might increase this more sense of loneliness and isolation as well.
Yeah. And speaking of the isolation, one of the things that we've seen is that folks can't have the gatherings that they used to at the time of a death. They maybe they have a graveside with just the next of kin, but the same social support doesn't seem to be anymore. Maybe people are dropping off the covered dish dinners, but they're ringing and running. And so I'd be curious, Easter, in your work as a victim's advocate, how are you seeing people being socially isolated? What are some of the things that you're hearing, and what might be helpful social supports for them?
Well, many of the survivors, I have been in contact with many of the survivors from our support group, and they talked about just having someone that they can trust, someone to talk to, because right now they really, really need this. Because many of the support groups that had been meeting on a regular basis, they had stopped. But I'm glad to say that our Survivors of Homicide Support Group, we will begin meeting virtually very, very soon, within the next 2 weeks. The survivors have also talked about, many of them were not getting adequate sleep. They were watching the news, and every time they turned the TV on, you saw something about COVID and so forth and so on. So, I expressed to them that it's important that they do get adequate rest, adequate exercise, and that they eat healthy as best as they can. And it's important that they engage in positive activities, although those activities may be limited. They may not be able to go to the gyms and so forth, but there's still things that they can do to get that exercise that they need. And just, trying to do some relaxation techniques and so forth. And also, I told them about trying to participate in counseling, and being that some of the support groups now will be meeting via Zoom and other means, that they need to probably try to get involved with that. And I even spoke with them about, some of the unhealthy ways of coping, that they should refrain, try not to utilize alcohol or drugs, because during this time, that may numb it for a while, but it's going to still be there. I told them about, not withdrawing from friends, although they may not be physically able to see their friends. Pick that telephone up. As I stated, use social media and so forth, and try not to blame anyone for what's going on, in this pandemic. There's a lot that we don't know. We're learning day by day, and more importantly, just taking care of themselves. As I stated, it is so important to take care of themselves.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for us to be gentle on ourselves as well, because, as we heard a lot of people say in the beginning of this pandemic, no one's done this before. We don't know how to do this. We're figuring this out. And who wants to be perfect at this anyway?
Exactly.
So
right.
maybe if we just say, hey, my purpose should be to try and take care of myself in whatever positive, constructive way that looks like. That's really helpful, Easter, in hearing the ways that different people are trying to connect, whether it be through, over the phone or social media or FaceTime, that kind of thing. Have you seen ways that churches or faith groups have been supporting their congregations in this time of virtual connection? Have you seen some of the evolving ways that people have been able to find that kind of support that they might have missed otherwise?
Yes, I have. I have seen where some of the churches in the Tri-County area, they are not meeting, of course, in their sanctuaries, mosques, and so forth. However, they are utilizing Zoom, like on Sundays when services will be going on. Members who have computers or even smartphones and so forth are able to call in and actually be a part of the service. I've seen where some of the survivors that I've spoken to said they took advantage of this. Some of the churches have had where members are able to, while practicing social distancing and so forth, they are able to actually drive in the churches or sanctuaries, mosques. They're able to get Sunday communion, and they are able to take it back home. I think this is so creative, are able to take it back home. And on Sunday, when the pastor actually goes through the sacrament, they're able to do that, and they can feel that connection and so forth. So I think that is so important now that we are learning new normals. And some of these new normals may become a part of our new normal. When the pandemic is over, we may continue doing some of these things. So I'm glad to say that in the faith community, and I can't speak for all of them, but I can only speak for the ones that I'm a part of and that I know of. They have been creative in trying to ensure that survivors, members are still being, they're still in the connection with their faith and so forth.
Yeah, we've seen that certainly in the Charleston community with our Jewish community and our Muslim community in creative ways, where gathering and being together and those rituals were so important, and they've really been very creative about connecting in different ways. And talking about connecting, in social distancing, it separates us, right? One of the important things that we've seen is folks who get a lot of support through support groups. And how do we do that now? What does that look like? Patty, I'd just be curious about your thoughts and experiences on support groups, and what your thought is on how people might be able to participate now certainly in their community.
Okay, great. There are several very good support groups. One is Grief Share. It's for anyone who has lost a loved one. I think it's a 13-week course, and it meets in churches and other locations. I'm not sure if they're meeting virtually or not. Another good one is Compassionate Friends, which is very good for any parents who have lost a child. It's been going on in the Charleston area for 30-some years, and they do a great job of comforting parents. The one I'm most familiar with is SOS, which is Survivors of Suicide. I lost my son to suicide almost 9 years ago. So I've been an active member of this support group for a long time. It's led locally by Charlotte Anderson. And before COVID-19, Charlotte was meeting twice a month at Heartland Rehabilitation Center in West Ashley. As soon as COVID-19 started, Charlotte got active and got on Zoom and has been meeting every Wednesday night from 7 to 8:30 with SOS. And it has given so many of our members who are grieving, some have been grieving for a year or more, some for a week or two. But they have all found great comfort in being able to meet weekly. I was with them last night on Zoom, and I asked them to tell me what group means to them. And one lady who lost her son, adult son, to suicide about 4 weeks ago said it feels like someone threw a rope down a well that I can grab a hold of and slowly climb up to make myself feel better.
Mm.
Another group member who is works with electricity is out of town with his work. He's been in Pennsylvania, he's now in Alabama, and he is able to join us weekly on Zoom, whereas before he would not have been here. He travels a lot with his work, and he was just had to miss. He wasn't able to be here.
Maybe technology is helping.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, Charlotte's thinking about combining the Zoom meetings with the in-person meetings once we're able to meet in person again. One of the group members said, and I'm kind of looking, I've got notes everywhere here, but she said, I can be myself and I know that others can relate. SOS allows me to get my feelings out and know that they're not going to judge me. Another lady said, coming here gives you an opportunity to just let your hair down. One young woman said, I lost my loved one only 2 weeks ago and I'm in the raw zone. Without this going on right now, I don't know where I'd be. So it's been a great support and a great help to many people. And if you are someone who has lost a loved one, whether it be a husband, a wife, a son, a daughter, a partner, a relative, if you've lost someone, this is a great way for you to come with other people who truly understand. And you can Google AFSP, which is Association for Suicide Prevention, and you can find any SOS meeting in the country there. Locally, with Charlotte's group, you can go online to Coastal Crisis Chaplaincy and connect with it that way.
Wow, thank you, Patty. And of course, we're talking about some national resources, some local resources, and we'll talk more about that in just a bit. But I will say, since we're talking about technology, there are grief support groups in every community, and if someone needs help and they look online and they see that there's one and they find out that they're not meeting because of the pandemic, let's be honest, if we, for those of us with gray hair, if we buy a new TV and we can't figure out how to get it set up, we call one of our grandkids or children and we have them set it up. Well, if there's a group that needs to go online, just grab one of those kids and they'll show you how to put it on Zoom. Right. They'll show you how to make it private. It's not that hard. So I will say, if you feel like technology has sort of shut you down, grab someone who knows. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to make that possible. I think we're in a time where we realize that we can connect, and technology is no longer an excuse, but an opportunity. So I just want to put that out there. And speaking of technology, if any folks have questions that you'd like us to sort of talk about and address, please feel free to comment on Facebook Live now, and we'll try and talk about those. We'll either directly answer them, or if we know that we're going to be answering it, we'll get to it at that time. So please feel free to do that. How about practical things? I always feel like when we have these conversations, I want people to walk away with something for tomorrow morning, that when they wake up tomorrow morning, they can pull this coping skill off the shelf and they're ready to go and they have something tangible that they can do. Alyssa, could you speak for a minute about some coping skills and mechanisms and things that might be helpful for folks who are experiencing this in their grief?
Sure. So I think in addition, I think Easter covered a lot of really good tips as well. And one of the big ones we've talked about is social support, right? Connecting with people, I think, is really important. And we need to be intentional about that. So I think one tip I would recommend is folks to truly each day be intentional. Who are they going to reach out to that day? Who are they going to plan to reach out to tomorrow? And be intentional in our actions, I think, is important. Creating routines in our day. These routines look very different now than they did, 8 weeks ago. And figuring out ways to what time I'm going to wake up every morning, am I going to shower, when I'm going to do some certain sort of daily routines, I think is important to keep us going. Other sort of things to consider is learning some skills that can help manage some of the overwhelming emotions some people might be experiencing related to grief. There are some tools out there, learning mindfulness type of strategies. Mindfulness is not meditation. Meditation is a form of mindfulness, but really what mindfulness is learning how to just be present and aware of our any given moment, our current emotions, our current thoughts, our current surroundings, our current senses. That's really what mindfulness is. And if we can learn to practice some mindfulness, learn how to be focused on the here and now, sometimes that can quiet some of all the noise that's going on in our brain and our hearts and our bodies. And so I would encourage people to check out, if you've never done it before, look it up, and there's some great resources online to practice. There's some apps. Headspace is a great mindfulness app. Calm is another one. Headspace actually right now, I believe, is free for healthcare workers. So if you have a national provider identification number as a healthcare provider, you can access that for free. But I encourage you to seek ways to kind of help sort of quiet that mind as much as you can, or learn ways to accept what's going on in our minds and our bodies, because what we're all experiencing is, a lot of it is normal. A lot of it is okay. And I think, Rich, as you mentioned very early on, trying to practice some self-compassion, I think is key in figuring out ways to do that.
That's very helpful. And just from a faith perspective, every different faith group has different practices that are very helpful. And a lot of those practices include rituals, whether it be, say, talking about a funeral and helping to process grief. And in many faith groups, the covered dish dinner is the next sacrament, right? It's a very important part of it. There are a lot of these rituals that are inaccessible now because of COVID. So part of our challenge is to figure out how to create those, or what are the routines in life that brought us a lot of meaning, either spiritually, creatively, purposefully, whatever our deepest self is, maybe the expression of, or, how do we find those? And we hear a lot of conversation about new normal, and we've been talking a lot about it. Maybe renewal is a better word, because it's a little more flexible. Is there a way that we can be centered on what's important to us? Can we just make a list? Here are the things that are important to me spiritually, personally, creatively, my deepest sense of meaning. And then how do we express those? A lot of our routines that we had were to help us express those, meet those needs. And once the routines are broken, then we're sort of stuck on how to meet those needs. But the routines exist to meet our deepest needs. We don't exist to meet the routines, right? So we get stuck when the routines break, but really if we just sort of can maybe sort of connect, whether it's again, in your deepest sense of need or self, or spirituality or creativity, whatever really is important to you, when we're centered on that, then out of that we can create new routines, even if it's today and it won't work tomorrow. We'll at least find some kind of satisfaction with that. I think also, I'd like to ask y'all, what are some intentional things that we could do? One thing that comes to mind for me is we're talking about how to deal with our grief if we've lost a loved one, but sometimes we help ourselves as we help others, right? So if we know we're driving to Walmart to pick up groceries and we know that there's someone who's struggling with something, is it worth just pulling up in front of their house and calling them on the phone and waving at them through the window and having a brief conversation so that they can physically see you and hear your voice? What are some creative ways that you think would help folks in that they could do as soon as they click off this webinar? What might you say, Easter? You have any thoughts on something really practical that someone could do?
Well, you touched on several things that, and I was thinking as you were talking too, I think this is the time here. This is the time here for us as victim service providers to give of ourselves. I mean, if we've never given before, but I know that we have, I think this is the time that we need to open up. We are as ourselves, we need to give, but we also need to receive the love and support if we've never done that before. We're so used to doing this ourselves. We're always the ones that are giving and so forth and so forth. But I think now too, we need at this time to show up and give of ourselves, but also to receive the love and the support other people are giving for us. I know that's hard for some of us, especially for myself. I love giving. I don't like people giving to me. So this is something that I'm learning too. But as you stated, be creative. There was a funeral. I think I saw this on TV. This gentleman lost his brother, and they couldn't have a traditional funeral. Well, he said he was going to celebrate his brother. He got in the street and he sang as loud as he possibly could, just songs that his brother loved. And he said he didn't care, and people were clapping, for him and so forth, and he sounded so good. But this was a way of him celebrating. So we just need to find ways to celebrate each other, do something. Today, for example, Publix Supermarket is our business partner. For the past 20 years, they have provided refreshment for our support group. And so they're still doing this. So I'm going to take those refreshments and give it to people in the community. I'm going to practice social distancing, but like you said, I'm going to blow that car horn and I'm going to say, hey, take this and so forth. It's from the survivor support group. So just ways that we could do, calling each other on the phone, staying connected, doing the Zoom. And I can go on and on. I'm very passionate, but I will stop. But there are ways. We just need to be creative and find those ways and do things.
Yeah. Patty, I see your head nodding. I'd just be curious, in your experience with grief, what are some of some days we don't feel like giving because we need more receiving. Some days we do well giving, and where's the balance in that? And what encouragement might you offer folks who are sort of struggling with taking that step to do something constructive and sort of to help them?
Well, we have a group. Our group is the Survivor Care Team, and we work with folks who have had a sudden and traumatic loss. And it can be a homicide, a suicide, a car accident. Sometimes it's a natural death. But we are all volunteers, and we come together to meet once a month. Now we're meeting on Zoom. We used to meet at North Charleston City Hall, and we probably will go back to that again. But we welcome anyone to come and join us. If you have a heart for it and you'd like to work with folks who have lost someone like this, please come. What we do is we meet with them maybe a month after the incident or the tragedy, and we will sit with them either in person or on the phone and offer them resources and ideas for ways to journey through grief. Also have one little thought. The other night, I was walking out, my husband and I were going out the door to walk the dog, and it was about 7 o'clock in the evening, and I looked out the door and I saw police cars with blue lights going, and I said, all right, honey, the police are outside. And he said, don't let them in. But what we found out when we walked out was that there was a long line of cars in front of the police car going straight down the street, and they were riding by a neighbor's house to celebrate their child's graduation from college. And they were honking their horns down there, and they were waving, and the family was out in the yard, and it was absolutely wonderful. It gave us a great feeling.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. Alyssa, I'd be curious from your perspective as a clinician, what are maybe some specific tasks that someone might set up for themselves tomorrow? Let's say someone's struggling and they just really are not even sure if they want to get out of bed. They're not even sure that they have the energy to smile at their neighbor. They're avoiding conversations. They're just don't have the energy. What would you advise to someone who's there and trying to get to the place that we're talking about, where they have the energy to help others? And
I think clearly very small steps. So if somebody's struggling getting out of bed, I would say the goal is to put the feet over the side of the bed, stand up, brush your teeth, so real small steps. Don't think big, think today my goal is to shower, right? And I encourage people as much as they can to try to get outside, off the couch, turn the TV off, whether that is you're able to have space to go walking, whether it is on a front porch, on a back porch, on the street curb, whatever it may be in your community where you're at, just to be outside, just to get fresh air on your face, to be able to look up at the sky, look up at the things around you. I think just getting outdoors, getting some vitamin D is really important. And maybe exercise if you can. We know that exercise and endorphins can have an impact on our mood, and it can actually give us some energy. So then we can then turn our attention to some of these more intentional type of activities. So, just some small steps.
Would you talk for a moment, if someone were to get outside and make the commitment, even if they commit that tomorrow they'll do it, if they get out there and walk, what might be some ways that they could be mindful or find some grounding? What techniques might you, or what things might they be looking for or aware of, or how might they make the best of that experience?
So by just being aware of your senses, so looking all around you, and not just necessarily looking in one direction, look everywhere, look all around, look up, notice all the things around you. Take deep breath in and smell. Notice smells if you can, touching things around you. So just really connecting with all your senses in the present can be helpful. Noticing kind of what thoughts or emotions pop up. Maybe it is about their loved one, and that's okay. And learning how to kind of take their loved one and the memory of their loved one into that moment, I think can help sort of bridge that gap between, living with living in loss and living with the loss into day-to-day life. Might be just some ideas to consider.
That's wonderful. And I think sometimes as well, if we haven't had the chance to have that memorial service or to have as meaningful of a tradition after a loss, there are things that we could probably do. We could take a walk and take that time to sort of shift from grief to a period of gratitude and say for this 10 minutes, I'm going to think of things to be thankful for, or, eulogize in a sense, or there might be meaningful things that someone could do. And maybe it's simply swinging the feet over the bed and taking a shower today in honor of your loved one and in honor of the life that you had together, that you'll have going forward with their legacy. There are different ways to bring intentionality into the things you do. You might not just be washing the dishes or folding the clothes, but you do it with a certain intentionality and focus. Maybe it's a mindfulness technique where you're feeling the soap and the dirt on the plate, and you're just thinking about that and getting sort of outside of your ruminating thoughts. There's so many different creative things that we can do. I want to talk for a minute about resources. So we know that there are probably folks who are watching this locally, of course, but maybe nationally as well, or wherever. So let's talk for a minute about resources, and then if we're talking about a local resource, maybe there's a national counterpart that we might mention. Easter, would you mind touching base on a few of those, and then we'll sort of do a little bit of a roundtable on that.
Sure. There are one amazing thing about Charleston County and the state of South Carolina. We have amazing resources for crime victims and survivors. The resources begin at the local level, and it goes all the way to the federal level. There's so many of them. I'm only going to highlight a couple of them, and please forgive me if I don't highlight all of them because there are just so many.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we're going to talk about our Survivors of Homicide Support Group because that support group has been in existence for 21 years. And prior to the pandemic, one could count on one hand the times that the support group didn't occur. The support group meets the first fourth Thursday of each month. And as I stated, during the pandemic, we haven't met. However, we will begin meeting on the 21st of May. We meet on Thursday. So we're very, very excited about that. And from what I've heard with some of the survivors I've spoken to, they're excited also. So we have that. That's for homicide survivors, including vehicular homicides. As I stated, we have victims advocate that can provide services from Charleston County. We have MUSC Crime Victim Research and Treatment Center. We have, of course, Coastal Crisis Chaplaincy. We have the FBI. We have the U.S. Attorney's Office, Department of Justice, but we also have the South Carolina Attorney General's Office of Victim Assistance that can help. We have support groups, My Sister's House, PAR, but also the Mount Pleasant Police Department. They have a domestic violence support group that has been meeting, and they're meeting now even during the pandemic. Very, very importantly, we have the National Center for Victims of Crime, and it's called the Victim Connect resource. And if you can Google that, victimconnect.org, you can get many, many information about services and so forth. I think I did say Coastal Crisis Chaplaincy, right? And I'm going to let some others talk, but we just have a whole lot of resources, and it's important that victim service providers, you just go to Google, and in your search bar, just put resources for crime victim support group, and you will get so much information. And lastly, 211. You can pick up your telephone and just dial 211. That's formerly hotline, and they can provide you with a lot of resources. So I'm going to turn it over to another of my colleagues, and they can piggyback on what I just said.
Yeah. Dr. Alyssa?
A couple other things, just nationally, if you're experiencing a distress related to COVID and what's going on, the disaster distress hotline is a 24-hour hotline to help folks coping with crisis of what's going on around us.
Mm-hmm.
If you are also in crisis, you can crisis text is a good resource if you don't want to speak to somebody but want to text. Is a wonderful resource as well from a national perspective. And then, as Easter said, I think just looking into resources for grief, there are a lot of different support groups that are out there that are specific to the unique type of loss. There's homicide, there's suicide, there's other types of loss as well. So I think just trying to get as much as you can connected to some of those resources important.
Yeah. And Chaplain, also, I would like to say in the Tri-County area, all law enforcement agencies have mental health professionals embedded at the agency. So that is a resource that is really has been very valuable to victims advocate and so forth. So, one can call any of the law enforcement agencies and they can be connected to that resource.
Yeah. I think there's so much help out there, and now with Zoom and FaceTime and all these virtual things, there's not much excuse anymore. I mean, people are showing up for work in their pajama bottoms and they put on their work shirt, you know, and they hadn't showered, but you can't tell watching the video, right?
Yeah.
So there's no more excuse. Well, there used to be a lot of barriers to getting help, but I think there are a lot of opportunities. Of course,
Right.
you can have counseling done virtually nowadays.
And can I just,
yeah,
sorry,
please.
can I just add about that? I think, you know, in the mental health world, most agencies have gone to provide telehealth. There's a lot of HIPAA compliant platforms now. So in South Carolina, for instance, the Medical University of South Carolina, as well as the Department of Mental Health, have all providing mental health counseling via telehealth. And nationally, I think a majority of agencies are providing mental health counseling via telehealth. So I would not wait until this passes over if you're experiencing distress, that there is counseling available.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Patty, did you have any other thoughts on resources or anything to chime in there?
The only other thing I'm thinking about is the Out of the Darkness walk that takes place in the fall. And it's something that we work on all year long. So you could, if you want to Google Out of the Darkness walk, it's under AFSP. You can start working now and you can start raising funds to help AFSP through the Out of the Darkness walk. It's a beautiful event. There's families that come together, survivors, and we talk and walk together. And it's an absolutely beautiful event. It's held at the Riverbanks Park in North Charleston now.
Yeah, wonderful. And I will say, if someone's watching this and they're in another community than ours, and they hear about a resource that seems like something they could really benefit from, but of course it's far away, just simply Google the name of whatever that is or something generic and put your community's name in there and see what pops up. You'll probably find a place to start, or certainly if you just start with your Department of Mental Health or again, your victims advocates in your community. All of those are networked. They're all connected. They'll know who to talk to, and they'll start to connect you up with grief resources, whether it be support groups or grief counselors or traumatic grief counseling, whatever it is that you need. I'm sure there's someone out there. The other thing too is most communities have chaplains. They'll either have public safety chaplains connected with their police departments who are used to dealing with crisis situations. They'll have, your hospitals have chaplains. There are usually folks out there if you need that kind of spiritual connection as well. All of this is sort of helps. You know, it's that sort of the different pegs on the stool that sort of help it keep balanced. You know, so we hope that today we've sort of touched on a lot of different experiences of grief that may be different for you, and hopefully helped you recognize some of that now. And hopefully we've given you a few coping mechanisms, and hopefully given you a few resources, or at least some tools to go out and get some help. What we'd like to do is offer some sort of parting encouragement. And I'll start, and then I'll send it over to Patty and Easter, and then let Alyssa close us out. When I think of coping, I think of a few words that begin with the letter C. So when I'm thinking of coping, I'm thinking of being connected, being centered, being constructive, and being consistent. And I think when we need to be centered and we're feeling disconnected and discombobulated and really struggling, being around other people, and especially helping people, if it's say a clinician or something like that, that connectedness can make all the difference in the world. And then next, it's really asking ourselves, what do I need to be centered and to be able to journey through this grief? What's important to me? What things do I need? And then next is, what constructive things can I develop in this time to sort of meet those needs? Maybe it's a new routine, a different ritual, you know, whatever it is. And then of course, can I be consistent with it? You know, maybe it's just for today, but if it's something positive I can do, and do a little today, a little tomorrow, I think it's very helpful. And then I'll add one more C. I'm sorry. I would just add compassion, because I think we're all going through a hard time with this, and none of us have done this before, as we said. And it's important to be compassionate. We don't want to be experts in going through a pandemic. We just want to be able to do it in a positive way. And so I just wish everyone blessings in your journey. I'll turn it over to Patty. What might you offer for folks?
Okay, I asked a very wise friend of mine yesterday what she would say to someone who's going through a difficult time. And of course, she texted me back. After praying, she said, I would say, no matter what you are facing or going through, trust God. He has all power in his hand and is in control of it all. I would also say, pray diligently and never doubt. Keep the faith and know that God is going to work it out according to his will.
Wow. Thank you. Easter.
I would say we're all in this together, but what does that really mean to you? Because we are great, we are strong, but what does that mean to you? And lastly, laugh a lot. Laugh a lot.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Alyssa.
Sure. Well, I'd like to just read a poem that this is what we read at the end of all of our support groups meetings for survivors of homicide as a way to kind of close out. So I'd like to read this to everybody. It's called the Hopi Prayer. Hold on to what is good, even if it's a handful of earth. Hold on to what you believe, even if it's a tree that stands by itself. Hold on to what you must do, even if it's a long way from here. Hold on to your life, even if it's easier to let go. Hold on to my hand, even when I've gone away from you.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Alyssa. Thank you for your wisdom, and Easter as well, and Patty. It's been a wonderful time talking and hearing all these different perspectives. And I think it's important for everyone to know that when you feel alone in this time and in your grief, just know that you're not alone. And also know that one of the best ways to not be alone is to be with someone else. So be with someone and be with those who can help you. And we wish you all the blessings and health and healing that you certainly deserve. So thank you all, and y'all have a wonderful day.
Thank you,
Thanks for being
Chaplain.
with us.
Yes.